CMMS Radio talks about all things CMMS, computerized maintenance management software, focused on maintenance management. It's the people, the process, and the culture that make your CMMS journey a success. Hey, welcome to CMMS Radio. I am getting ready to meet with Tacoma Zach. He's the co-founder of MentorAPM. He's got 25 plus years working in water utility management and is a true advocate for uncovering risk and doing the right things to the right assets in the right order to get the right results so you can sleep at night. We're going to have a real talk about how this all started, why it matters, and we'll carve up some random kind of concepts in maintenance and asset management. Kind of the same thing, I suppose, and get some industry trends. Tacoma Zach, welcome to CMMS Radio.
It is a pleasure to be here. It's definitely been something I've been looking forward to all week long.
Oh, yeah, me too. I was just up at a conference. I think we were talking a little bit about that, and I was thinking about it. And then this morning, I get an email, and they're like, hey, you want to come up and be on this show, which I wanted to, but I said, I've got an episode today. I don't want to get stuck in traffic when I'm coming back to make the episode because you and I have been trying to make this happen. And thanks, Jennifer, for helping us facilitate. I'm guessing about a year, and I've been watching the MentorAPM journey. I know about some of the recent developments that are really out there kind of on LinkedIn. That's where I stay in focus, but a long overdue conversation. And I want to kind of just cover a bunch of random stuff. But the first thing, it's pretty typical, but Tacoma, tell us, how did this all start? And you can go back as far as you want to, but then kind of bring us up to present times.
So how we started MentorAPM?
Yes, and how you actually got into industry, because I know there's some really good background there.
Yeah, so I had actually I had done a 2 degrees in chemical engineering up in Canada from University of Toronto. Worked for Procter and Gamble for a couple of years. Kind of wanted to do something perhaps a little bit. It was interesting. I was actually in diapers in that business model, but I thought, wastewater, that's actually pretty cool. You get to clean up the environment. So I went to work for a boutique firm through a series of acquisitions, and this boutique firm was amazing. Really smart people. Ended up having to build my own pilot plants, buildings, that kind of stuff, and so I learned really a lot of blood and guts in the field stuff. Eventually, through a series of acquisitions, became U.S. Filter. Ended up moving overseas to Thailand, and that's when you get a chance to work overseas, you get it's like they give you a machete and it's like carve a path through the jungle. You get so much responsibility. And I would say that every year overseas is like 3 years at home. Phenomenal responsibility. And just great experiences. So eventually, that gig ended up, Veolia bought us, came home to the US, did a stint as a vice president of business development for the West on the industrial side and, in the western side of the US. And then a little bit in and out, I went and started my own consulting operations firm for a bit. Came back into Veolia. They wanted me to run the business in the West for the industrial sector. So the Chevrons, the Exxons, they were all my customers. In the meantime, I'd garnered a very strong friendship with the director of asset management for the West, and he had developed this program that was really useful for all our customer base. Excuse me. And long and short of it was 2013 rolled around, and I was looking at doing my own thing, and I had a couple of opportunities. And he said, "Hey, well, would you like to look at this software?" Because he had started his own company. And that was Uberlytics at the time, and that company still exists. And the technology, it was one of the founding technologies for MentorAPM. Fast forward from 2013, we built a nice business out of that. So I took that company over, and then John Clow and I got together in 2017 and formed MentorAPM to satisfy a need in the market. I had been on the ops side, and we had always had to build our own tools to do asset management in the grand scheme, but let's say RCM, or to better do predictive stuff, or to do a capital plan, or to do risk analysis. We were using the Uberlytics software to do that. But the point is that John and I got together and we realized we could build something for the market that satisfies all the requirements or all the things that people who run a utility are looking for, and that they don't have to go to other bespoke pieces of software, self-supported, or cobble something together and unify it all. So mobile, GIS, and all the asset performance management stuff, simple work, CMMS kind of things, but all the way through risk analysis and capital planning. So it's been a phenomenal journey. We've grown. We've been positive in the black every year. We've had nice growth, and I think when we look at the marketplace, we have quickly established, I think, ourselves as the firm that understands from the field what it takes to run a utility and provide that cohesive software that they don't have to go look anywhere else. We also looked at it and said, let's not I was going to use another word, but let's not tick our customers off and make things so hard to own. So we came up with a unique ownership model in the sense that we make it real simple, and the IT people like that, and it's something that takes all the pain points out. Pain takes it out to own it and to use it, and so that sort of brings us up to the part where like, hey, that's Mentor, over the last years, and since then. Gosh, this past year was just phenomenal. We can I start talking about Lens for a real quick sec? Because I
Yeah,
mean,
you sure can.
oh,
I was going to ask about it. So you're talking about asset lens, right?
yeah. So we were always really strong on being able to bring like RCM into day to day maintenance activities and management of your assets and make risk based decisions and blah blah blah, all the really cool stuff. Well, I'm in the field and I'm actually looking after something for a customer of ours, and there's a contractual obligation. And I'm using our tech, which was an asset collector, and we're already down to like, sub 5 minutes, being able to capture detailed information about an asset, but it's still taking too long. And we've got like, 10,000 assets to get through. And I'm looking at this thing and I'm going like, man, there's got to be a better way of doing this thing. So posed it to the team and we said, guys, is there something that we can do? And we had played around already with machine learning and this and that for maybe about a year.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden we realized, yeah, there's something that we could do. We could just do it with that much better. We went from a spark of an idea, because we've got a very sharp team, to a technically viable product in under 4 months. And then anybody who's done this kind of work before knows that you might have a great idea and it might work, but how do you commercialize it? And how do you get it to market? How do you get somebody to onboard and all that stuff? So
Yeah.
when we began to investigate that, we said, we got to make this thing really easy. The software makes this task of getting asset information so easy, down to the taking a few photos and condition assessment and plate data and all that stuff, down to like 30 seconds, maybe a minute. So the onboarding has to be equally as simple and as easy. And I think we've done that. And so that took a little bit of time because you want to do it right. And then just before Christmas, we sort of launched. We said, hey, we're doing this thing. And then at Christmas, or just sort of in the January, we launched a 30-day, 30 asset free trial. So it doesn't matter who you are, except maybe competitors.
Mhm.
Um, but we want every utility, whether it's municipal water, wastewater, whether it's power, I don't care if it's public roads or Parks and Rec or a power company, it is 100% of the addressable market. So whereas we want them to try it, so we made it really simple. Try it, test drive it for 30 assets, or play around with it for 30 days, and then give us a call.
Yeah.
And this was one of the key differentiators. That's why it's kind of like a product on its own. We compete in a market with MentorAPM. We compete in the GIS market. We compete in the vertical asset market. We compete in the advanced asset performance stuff. And we're the only COT solution that has it all together and everything works. I mean, there isn't anything that, there's no integration issues with mobile or GIS or none of that stuff. Out of the box, it all works. But when we look at that, we go like, well, there's a certain segment of the market that's willing to do this. They have to be interested in wanting to do better than their current CMMS lets them do. Maybe they want to advance in doing better asset management in general. And that's why it's called Mentor, because we mentor folks along the way. But when we looked at that, and we say, well, there's a subset of the market that is going to flip out their CMMS and swap something out. This, though, MentorAPM Lens is 100% of the addressable market. We don't care if you are a 1 MGD plant or half MGD plant, up to the DC Waters of the world. It doesn't matter to us whether it's horizontal networks or vertical assets. It doesn't matter whether it's a power plant, if it's roads. I was going to say roads and track, but that's a magazine. If it's roads or Parks and Rec or any of that stuff, trains, transportation, uh, the Exxon Mobil's of the world. I don't know if I'm allowed to say their name or not, but the oil companies of the world, the oil and gas. It is literally, we just look at it as like there is no market for us that doesn't work.
Well, and what's interesting, you say there's no market that doesn't work. You also have one of the things I'm after and always curious about is what is the specificity around what you do and who you serve. So when we talk from a utility perspective, and that has some kind of secondary and tertiary areas that it touches, right? If we get out towards the fringe, but that has the kind of specificity that I'm always interested in because back when I was in the world of CMMS,
Yeah.
we were primarily built for one thing
Mm.
that touched a bunch of things. So then that became our actual market.
Yeah.
And what can happen is you can start to spin out and try to scale everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's a real problem.
Yes.
And it's not just a problem to scale that company for yourself, but it's an even worse problem for clients out there. So recently, I was having a really cool conversation as recently as yesterday about this overall space and how much noise there is and how difficult it is for clients to figure out who's the best, what should I be using, who should I be talking to. And if we want to know about what's the best solution, not just CMMS, but if you're talking about asset management, any of these, first and foremost, your people have to be willing to and continue to use it. And that comes down to how well you and your team understand not just your market, but at the individual client level, what they're actually doing, why it matters,
Yeah.
where the impacts are going to take place to achieve those outcomes. And you yourself have an immense amount of experience actually being in the actual environments where this happens. So you're not just programming some software to solve some problems. You've had and experienced the problems, built the teams, worked with the teams over that long period of time. And I think that gives you certain advantages that are beneficial for the clients. And I'm always passionate about that. How can we really make a difference? And I'll ask a question soon.
Yeah, it's
So
okay. This is great. I love
at,
listening to this.
at this conference I was at, and I want to be kind about it, but I was talking to a lot of people at all these booths, and part of the conference was really big, like 18,000 people a day rolling through there. And these are people providing equipment and things for other manufacturers. And I wanted to ask them, well, tell me about this piece of equipment and then tell me what's happening in your plant. What are you guys doing to manage the assets that build these assets that you put in environments where they then have to be managed and maintained? And a lot of them didn't want to have that conversation because they couldn't. So I was concerned about their front lines when it comes to customer facing, not having even general surface level understanding to have a conversation about that.
Mm, mm.
With you, I can have that conversation. So I wanted to ask, as it relates to Mentor APM, you've already talked about who it really serves, but where does it make the true impact in the environment? Not about the software, but about the outcomes. You've already mentioned RCM,
Yeah.
and let's try to agree that maintenance is the active maintaining. You're there to protect,
Yeah.
and maintenance's job. Maybe we could agree that it's about assuring capacity. So, how does it really unfold in the environment, on the plant floor, on the land subdivisions, et cetera? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Sure. I mean, gosh, and as you were saying these things, I know that we could probably go down so many different roads and talk about RCM and different maintenance activities and failure modes and blah, 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 and all sorts of.
Yep.
So I think there were a couple of questions in there. So one, I think you addressed a very important part, and that is understanding who your business target is, and whether, and we have such a broad set of tools that find applicability both in industrial and in municipal context, but the business models for those industries is different. So industrial, they minimal amount of assets to accomplish the task at hand to make a product for profitability. So for them, uptime is a big deal, and they want to make sure that the performance of the asset is there. And so what we offer is a complete set of the asset performance, like the failure modes, and therefore what you should be inspecting. In fact, this is something that we always talk about is like so many customers, and this is not because they're intent on just doing this. I think there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace. The analogy I always go to is this: they say, "Oh, you got a car and you're going to go across the country," and they'll check the paint on the car or they'll check the trunk liner when what they should be checking is the tires, the oil, the fuel, that kind of stuff, right? Do they have spark plugs? Are they any good? Doing the things that are essential for maintaining that objective. So when you look at an industry, we provide them the ability to understand exactly what's happening with their assets because we provide a detailed library of inspection elements. And then we handle the math nicely so that they can accurately determine whether they have an operational risk or they've got an endemic risk. And an operational risk means, hey, I got a brand new car, flat tire. I'm not going anywhere until I fix my flat tire, but it's a brand new asset. Versus got a jalopy and it's sitting around for a while. There's an endemic risk, meaning I'm at a risk running this thing. So for their business model, being able to intervene super quick. When we look at the municipal market, it's a little bit different. There's usually an excess of assets because they have capacity, overcapacity. And the reason is their business model is never don't make water and always take wastewater. Never don't take wastewater. So they have this binary situation where it's like, always do this and never don't do something else. And so they say, okay, cool, no problem. We'll just have extra assets to make sure that never happens. Because that's their charter. If you look at, the charter of why the assets exist, what ended up being put in place to fund those assets in the first place, that's usually described in there. So when we look at that, we're like, oh, okay, same kind of thing. We can prioritize. We can help them figure out what's going on with their assets. But in that particular case, it's a little bit different than where they want to intervene. So in both cases, we also have this built-in risk analysis tool sets that lets them prioritize and understand which assets are the most critical and therefore what they should spend attention on to make sure that it stays up and running. And in an industrial, it's like, never let that go down. And on the municipal ones, like, yeah, these are important, but this system is really important. So you know what? We're going to make sure we have those other pumps ready to go. And we're also going to make sure we stage, I don't know, a chemical delivery system or some other portable sense of equipment so that we're always managing that risk. But the point of intervention is a little bit different between those two. So how we see it play out in both industries, but in slightly different times of intervention, different point on their failure curve, different point on their economic curve, is the prioritization of which assets should be looked after first and foremost, to never give on your primary objective, and then being able to understand when they need to intervene to get the best value from the asset. In other words, don't over, and don't under.
So two things just kind of popped into my head as you
Yeah.
described that exact aspect of this. So one, criticality, and criticality as it relates to what's the most critical asset or part of an overall asset system that's going to create the greatest risk of downtime. We want to know about that and always be watching, always be watching, because absent that, it's just too much risk. And then the other part was really what I'm trying to get to is when you bring this technology in for the criticality, asset hierarchies, failure modes, failure codes, are you still finding to this day that sometimes the maintenance teams themselves are less aware of what they should really be doing, and they've maybe even learned over the years some bad habits and they just don't know that they're bad, to actually turn that corner into developing better criticality assessment and doing all the work to actually get it right before they start really pushing this to thrive towards efficiency?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, but it's a highly qualified one. There's the human psychology aspect of it, and then there's sometimes the mountain you think you got to climb and get over in order to get where you think you want to go. Generally speaking, we found every customer understands about 80% of where their risk is intuitively, just because they know they've had some failures. They're pretty obvious, that kind of stuff. What we found though is that it's that 15-20% that hasn't been discovered yet. Could be as low as 10%, if it's a real smart agency. But that's the stuff that can also really bite you and bite you hard, right? So the second part is when you change the way people do things, now all of a sudden everybody is a little bit untethered, a little uncomfortable. They're no longer the expert, and the playing field is a little bit more level. people don't like to no longer be the expert. They don't like to no longer do things the way they used to do them, that sort of stuff. And this isn't intended to unseat anybody or anything like this. So the way we get around that is we've simplified the process. This goes back to how we developed this thing, over the decades at hundreds of plants when we were, working for somebody else. And the the notion is that, and there was this fascinating study done in 1997. It was a psychological study, and they explored the difference between a room full of subject matter experts for a facility and math whizzes, like the NASA grade kind of math. And what they did is they evaluated the same set of systems. And what they found is that a group of people who are subject matter experts in a particular their facility, they were able to identify risk, the relative risk of all the systems and assets, statistically insignificantly different. In other words, virtually the same as a bunch of super high math folks, right?
Yeah.
And what was so telling about that and such an advantage is that we could take that and we could apply that to every single customer and have them engage with their system and tell us what busted, what didn't, how did this impact you? And they could relatively rank and scale where they were at risk and what was critical or not. Well, they're involved in the decision then, and it's their data. It's not us telling them anything.
Mm-hmm.
The coolest part is you had engineering, you had operations, you had maintenance, sometimes safety in there as well. Sometimes you brought the electricians in, and you had management in there. And they're all of a sudden seeing each other's silos, and the walls are coming down because they began to understand what's going on. So that is one way that we found is really effective in getting folks to adopt an approach, because they realize, oh, Doug over there now understands why I can't give him the asset when he wants it, because if I don't do it today, he's not going to have it next month when we have a change in water quality in the river and he needs every asset up and running, whatever the circumstances are. So they begin to understand each other's constraints and their KPIs, and maintenance is supposed to provide the assets for operations so that operations can do what the assets are supposed to do, but operations has to release them once in a while to maintenance so that the assets keep doing what they're supposed to do, right? So they began to understand that part. So the answer to your question is a little bit long-winded again. That's the way I do things. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, there is sometimes resistance, but it's understandable. And when we involve them in that, then they begin to understand. And in every single case we've seen, and we've done this now for, when we were at Veolia and then since then, so I would say close to 20 years, everybody's happy at the end because they understand the other members of their team from other silos understand their world now. They've uncovered 10 to 20% of the assets or systems that they didn't realize could really bite them. And they're all really happy about, yes, that's the ranked order. And yes, this is where we should spend money for, spending out of risk. Or this is where we need to spend attention on this asset because it's high criticality. And therefore, we can never let that go down unexpectedly. It's going to go down, but we need to know about it. We need to monitor it.
Oh, man, there's a bunch of stuff there. So
I went on forever.
No,
I'll try to get shorter sound bites.
This is what we want, because the whole idea behind this is, we should all be thinking critically or more critically, and that's hard for people to do if they don't develop that as a habit, because everybody's moving so fast and there's so much pressure and all this kind of stuff. So when the rubber meets the road, there's a job that needs to be done. But when you have teams like this that are actually cohesive and see one another, they have a far greater likelihood of succeeding. And what I'm getting from you is this sense that you're not just passionate about your software, you're passionate about the industry and the people on the plant floor, or on those, like I say, the rigs, or wherever you're at a wastewater facility, and you don't just sell the software, you come in and understand and deliver the solution to the problem. And it doesn't feel to me like that's going to go away. Almost like scaling a white glove operation. So you're not just selling software, you're actually solving problems. And the reason I say it that way, it's not to overblow it into something that it's not. It's that there's a lot of industry people involved with different sets of technology that are just getting the deal and moving on, getting the deal and moving on. And I get a sense that you guys are not just getting the deal, but you're getting in and making sure that they're successful and that you don't go away after the fact.
I appreciate that you say that, because we usually end up being called back in, not because there's a problem with the software, but because, hey, we need advice on this and advice on that. So the software is called Mentor for a reason. So we took the decades of running facilities, and I was actually always the either the area manager for the entire West or whatever. But I'd show up at a facility and I'm like, hey, give me the wrench, let's take this pump apart and that sort of stuff and take a look at it, because it was
Yeah.
fun, right? And you could go in and you could hear, oh, that thing is ringing higher than it used to. I think we should check the bearings on this sort of stuff, because sometimes when you come in as from the outside, you see things in contrast, whereas if you're involved in it day to day, you're just, it's like the frog where the water gets hotter and hotter and hotter. You don't realize the water's getting hotter, and the next thing you know, you're boiling, right?
Yeah.
So but I appreciate you say that, because well, actually, at one of our customers more recently that went live, we did talk to them and said, look, MentorAPM in its entirety, in its suite, is intended to facilitate the benefits of asset management. We're not going to write a policy for you. The software isn't going to do that, although we've played around with that. But what it does do is, if you gather the information the way the software enables you to gather it, to greater or lesser extent, you will be able to garner the benefits of an asset management program um, just by happenstance. So, all the modules are there to facilitate various aspects of it. So this customer said, well, this is great. We, bought your software. We want you to do an asset management 101 course for us. So I did a 2.5 hour A to Z top line kind of stuff. Well, they liked it so much, they said, can you do this in 8 parts in greater detail? Want everybody in the entire utility to watch this. We're going to record it. Off hours, people are going to be required to do this part.
Mm-hmm.
What was cool about this is that you've got finance, you've got operations and maintenance, and everybody from shop floor, from the earliest entry, they call it trainee, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
to the CEO. They're all watching the same thing, so they're all trying to get on the same page. And if just to touch on asset management for a second, I think this is a little bit maybe sort of the part that irritates me a little bit. I think way too often the concepts and the idea of asset management has been obfuscated. And I like the fact that that's a kind of a complex word to describe exactly what it's doing. It's hiding. It's sort of, making it too opaque. Asset management is actually really, really simple. And what we always do is we say, look, guys, you actually do asset management on a daily basis in your home lives. You make sure there's fuel in your car. You make sure that you get an oil change when you need to. You check your tires. You make sure that when your daughter's driving a vehicle, or your teenage son, that it is in good enough shape that they're going to come home exactly the way they left. You actually perform asset management intuitively. You're making risk-based decisions. You're trying to make sure you get max value from your car, and not run it roughshod and buy a new car every year, the way some municipalities or cities end up spending our money. And so when I normalize it for them and say, look, here's how you look after your car, here's how you look after your domestic situation, all of a sudden the light bulb's going like, oh, I don't know why all of a sudden I would do things differently at work. We make common sense decisions. We try to make risk-based decisions. What puts us at risk? Well, don't do that. Monitor it more, or maybe we have to spend our money out of that, or spend our way out of that, and buy something better or newer. And try to get the most from our assets. And then the other part, of course, is you want to make sure that everybody is aligned from CEO down to the shop floor level. So we provide some of that. But where I was going with this is that I appreciate you saying that we are so interested in people doing better. We want to offer for them a chance to do better. And then there's the selfish part, and that is ideally with ratepayers and tax structures and that sort of stuff, it's our money that's not being used to the best possible outcome. And we're like, no, we all know we could do better. So we really hope that folks catch a bit of that vision.
I like that stuff because, some might say, that's a bunch of, mushy, gooey, happy stuff. But the reality is, for me, I like this concept or idea of the elusive win-win, and that you should always be chasing it, and that it creates this kind of cyclical effect where not just merry-go-round, but more like go beyond transactional nature of things
Yeah.
and make it so that we can all get somewhere together. And that's not meant to be any more complicated than what it actually is. And when you talk about the the actual simplicity to how this really works, when you want to manage assets and, say, for example, create a truly reliable plant or environment, regardless of where it is and what you're really doing. You reminded me, there's a friend of mine in the industry, his name's Brian Bieski, and one of the things he says about maintenance and maintenance best practices, primarily, it should be boring. And his point with saying that, for me, is that it's simple, do the basics really, really well. And boring means that you're not running around just doing excessive, like, PMs that don't matter, or you're having all kinds of failures and you're all kind of running around without any cohesion. And the best thing about everything that you were saying just now is you're not just connecting the dots, you're connecting the organization in a holistic way. If you're in a position with both, not just the software, but also the mentorship and being able to come on site and do training or do something virtual, where you're talking about bringing the shop floor all the way up to the C-suite and everything in between, and something really amazing happens when that is happening in any organization, in any business whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I'll go back to how people and process first, layer the technology in there after. I think technology can sometimes help with kind of the overall culture, but
Yep. Yep.
those are the basics. And if you build beyond that, if you scale beyond that, if you move away from, let's say, for example, effectiveness into efficiency, but you weren't really effective, it's all for naught.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
just won't work. And that's kind of where I always want these conversations to go, is that it's not, I say things like, nobody cares about your product. Nobody cares about your features. What they care about is their problem. And I'm borrowing that from a
Yes.
lot of industry experts that understand how to solve problems for clients, no matter what they're selling. But I like that stuff. And I think it takes commitment and intention. And I think you have to be willing to take a little bit longer to do it better on behalf of your client, so that you all thrive for the long term, not the short term. And that's a little bit soapbox like, but
Yep.
that's what I'm after. And I hear a lot of that.
So, in fact, to build on some of the stuff you mentioned being efficient. I want to touch on prioritization, and I want to touch on something you just said at the end. So, I'm always a little bit careful to say this. There are a few, but we are a very, very small number of CEOs of software companies that are actually practitioners, not only in a particular field, but have actually been in the field and actually run facilities. So, I've seen some others that have been in the field, but I'm one of the few who's actually been responsible for the P&Ls of the region and of the facilities and that kind of stuff. Now, that's not meant to be self-aggrandizing. That just means I understand the pain and challenges involved in trying to make stuff work. And in our case, it was not just municipal, but it was industrial stuff as well. So there's a strong profit and loss component to that. What we found was so effective, and you mentioned this thing about being efficient. Our big push was always, we must prioritize. We've got $100 of need and we got $10 to spend. Where are we going to get the best return on that $10 we're going to spend? So we had to prioritize, and that meant we needed to do a criticality assessment. And there's 1,000 ways to do it wrong, and there's a few good ways, to do it right. And we hope people do it the right way. We think we've got one of those ways, and it's really efficient. So that prioritization was so important, because you can get so busy doing useless work. Like you're talking about, it should be boring. Sure,
Yeah.
a whole bunch of stuff. It's all exciting. We know people who used to create crises and break stuff because it made it exciting and it justified their existence. And they're just running around and everyone's going like crazy. Oh, they're the superhero. No, 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 no. There is that great video. It was done by what was it last week, tonight or whatever, Oliver, what's
Oh
his name?
yeah. Yeah.
It's about asset management. It's a movie where nothing happens, right? And that's ultimately the way it's supposed to be. We should know what's going on with our assets. We should be able to plan when they come down, especially if they're critical. If they're not critical, let them run to failure. That's acceptable. But let the ones that should never go down unexpectedly, prepare for that, so that we maintain that level of service in a municipal context that they're expected to maintain, right? So that prioritization means you shift those limited resources to where it really, really matters. And so I think we're basically, saying the same thing, two sides of the same coin. It's just so important. Otherwise, we just do the churn and burn. And it's analogous to like, I'm going to check my trunk liner because I'm doing a trip across the country. Who cares?
Yeah, yeah. And another thing that I think kind of we all know is that in all of these environments, these cycles tend to repeat when leadership changes,
Yep.
a champion leaves, some other kind of disruptive thing happens, and somebody may be trying to do something, but they don't know what they're about to do. And then later we find out it really took everybody off course. Now you've got different things that aren't reaching the original kind of day one milestones that that person inherited.
Yep.
And a lot of that comes from, I think, and I'm not saying that I'm the guy that can be that guy. I'm just saying I observe it where, people parachute in and they get titles without the relative experience and understanding. And then they don't do anything about that, because I'm always saying, fine, maybe you are the person for the job. What did you do to assure that?
Yeah.
Did you go and find your gaps and then figure it out? Did you go, too many people are behind a desk, go down, talk to people, understand it, don't critique or anything, just take it in and figure out, listen, and then you start to connect everything back around. And I'll always jump around into all these areas, and I'll be doing it probably forever, because there's always an opportunity somewhere, if one person hears this, to make those effective, impactful, and then potentially long-term solutions that can become efficient. So
Yeah.
I like all that stuff. I want to ask you kind of a little bit of a first a CMMS question, and then I'm going to switch to something a little bit controversial.
Sure. Love it.
First one on CMMS. So you have a work management component in yours, and for me, when I look at CMMS, I'm always kind of debating the differences between EAM, CMMS, work order management, and I kind of believe, and it might be completely wrong, I'm not trying to be right, if it touches maintenance in any way, shape, or form, and it manages those processes or a great number of them, I think those are all maintenance management solutions.
Sure.
But I want to understand from you why Mentor APM, being asset centric, is not, is it better to say that it's not just a CMMS,
Yeah.
but it has some of that functionality?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Um, yeah. One of the things we struggled with is because we developed a solution that is so comprehensive. Sometimes it's difficult for people to ascertain or to access what it is that we really do. So if we start at the simplest form, we are a CMMS. We will help manage someone's computerized maintenance. We are the computerized maintenance management system considered on steroids. So people have to go and do work. Absolutely, we do that stuff. All the scheduling stuff. Oh, lots of that sort of stuff. All the cost roll ups and that sort of thing. Oh, lots of that stuff. But then on top of that, there's the asset performance stuff. It's one thing to say I got to go out and manage work, and you can be busy doing that and not be prioritized, right? Or that sort of stuff. Or maybe I'm just sampling the wrong stuff. So built into it is the asset performance stuff, which is based on a complete library that says for every asset you've got, this is the asset type. Here's how that asset fails in every possible way. Here are the things you should inspect about that asset to understand where you are on that failure curve so that you can intervene appropriately. And if it's a high critical asset, all right, do it faster. If it's not, let it run to failure. So we give that part, and it's out of the box because we said folks need this because we've seen people try to invent their own stuff, and I'm always amazed at what they come up with is what they think is a failure mode. And I mean, we're real good friends with the RCM folks and the Aladon network, and the guy who was one of the originators of part of that technology that we own was actually trained by John Mowbray's first hire. And in fact, we were doing a demo for somebody, a big global water company, and that first hire was actually in the meeting, and his name was Peter Stock, and he actually asked us, he says, hold on a second, and he asked us how we do something on this asset performance stuff. And I described how we do it, and he goes, and he verbally says to everybody in the room, he goes, this is the only COT solution on the market that does it right, which was, we love that, because it's like, as an engineer, 2 + 2 = 4, and you want to make sure that you've got an outcome you can live with. Red face test. Well, I mentioned prioritization before. And so now we look at it and go like, well, yeah, we're CMMS, and we look at asset performance management. We capture that stuff so you can intervene and, do your CMMS stuff. Well, you have to prioritize. So we have a built-in criticality and risk analysis tool set that is the only one that is ISO 55000 compliant. And I'm careful how I use my words here. I sit on the TC 251, involved in that, and I actually really like the concepts behind asset management. I think they're really valuable. We got a lot of financial benefit from going down that road when I was running utilities or running a region for Veolia, and the municipal market particularly so. And so we have that, and you have to be able to prioritize. Well, the next thing is like, now I know what I got to inspect. Well, where am I going to spend my money on, to manage my way out of risk? Well, so we have a capital planning tool set that builds right out of the risk analysis tool. So we're one of the only ones that actually have a risk-based capital planning tool that comes from and builds directly from the risk analysis and lets you re-rank your risks. So when you finish your project to spend your way out of some risk, you actually get a return on investment. You can see exactly how much risk you reduce for every dollar you spend, and vice versa. Compare all your projects. So from that perspective, we provide that end-to-end part that says, yeah, I'm managing my stuff, but now I know where to invest. And so, there's a couple of firms, PowerPlan's one, Copperleaf, we really respect those guys. We're like a light version of those guys. Then there's the other side, and that's like mobile. What am I going to do on GIS versus my vertical plans? Well, we cover that as well because we recognize there's a different need in the distribution network or the collection network than there is at the plant level. Plant level is very complex when it comes to interrelationships and flow and all that sort of stuff. And it's kind of difficult to ascertain what's really critical. They're more difficult. And we deal with it in a hierarchy structure. But the same type of applicability to be able to facilitate that work out in the field, and everything that this asset performance management and criticality stuff, we provide that out to the field as well. So it's all, we have competitors like, CityWorks, and there are things that we can do that they cannot do because we take a different approach to what we can display on a map than they do. And we have these map views, and you could literally see what my work plan is for the next month, next year, and watch it change over time because we overlay things that they just don't have the ability to do. It's structural. So we take work really seriously, but productivity is the goal for us, so that you are way more efficient and you get better outcomes with your assets. You know more and you're more efficient.
Yeah, and you have to make that investment in your clients because they're making an investment in you, and that's kind of how that kind of overall long-term play really works. It's not about value engagements that get them trapped into a never-ending integration or deployment. It's about really adding value. And I think there's so many players out there because everybody works differently when it comes to their specific site, their specific org, and then you split that org into the different locations. So that's, everybody asks me, why are there so many solutions? And I'm like, because there's so many different ways to do it, but they're all kind of doing the same thing. You're not going to get it done with cookie cutter, but you are going to be very successful with the organizations that deliver the technology, that have the people on their team that know how to understand you and get you to that, not finish line, but that state of existence where you can continue to reset the finish line and push it out.
Yeah.
And I love all that stuff. Here's the controversial question, so to speak. I don't know if it's really controversial.
Go for it.
Is there really an Industry 5.0, or is that a bunch of hogwash?
Well, I've always wondered where the 2.0 and 3.0 and 5.0 comes from. If you look at how software is developed, there has to be a step function change in capabilities, usually a replatforming or a major, structural change in the background where the technologies you're using is completely different. I view things as there are a few technologies that I think have been disruptive. And when you look at a typical physical wastewater plant, it's the same as it was in the 1920s, basically the same. Yeah, we got a couple of cool tools to help us measure oxygen levels and blah, 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 and all that stuff. Great stuff. But fundamentally, it's the same thing. Different on the software side, different on the technology side. So when we look at there was a fundamental shift from on-premise to cloud a while ago. And
Mhm.
that was good because it meant support was easier, less code, I don't want to say less code base, a different code base that was easier to maintain and update, and economies of scale. Now, with the advent of AI, and we were very cautious about this because we took a hard look at a number of the companies that we thought were some of the best in the industry, and for the risk of naming a few, like I always thought, AspenTech's technology was outstanding, very expensive, great for industrial, um, and a lot of machine learning and really cool stuff. Very, very, very neat. And there's a number of other ones as well that are really good in that. But what we worried about was the value proposition to the municipal customer in the first place. For I think AI is able to deliver a lot of value. And I think we've tapped into that because we look at productivity before predictions. And here's why we do that. And we keep AI on a very, very short leash. We let it do for our customers what takes hours and weeks and months to do by hand. And we let the AIs do that because they're really good at doing that sort of stuff. The problem with some AI stuff is the hallucinations or the predictions that they make. And here's sort of the B I've got about that one. There are companies out there that say, oh, well, we can predict this and predict that. And they're in our space. And I always wonder, how the heck are you going to do that when your software doesn't even capture the data or know what to do with it in order to feed an AI to make those predictions? And if you don't have the data, you can't predict anything. You're going to get a hallucination or whatever. The other part is so there's that part. So we're very careful with predictions because we did everything and historically so on principles, first principles, and some math equations and definitions. But that ties into the difference between industry versus municipal. Industry has the financial resources because they're profit driven to spend millions and millions of dollars on training an AI model to get a return on investment in 2 years. Municipalities don't have that kind of cash, nor do they have that need. You're comparing ASA level math and control of environment versus call it the red wagon where the wheels are coming off, you're going down the hill and it's held together with band-aids and duct tape. And I'm not suggesting municipalities are like that, but it's the business case that's different. Municipalities, much more so because of the redundancy in the assets and because of the huge variation in inputs to their assets, climate, the environment that they're in, whether the mechanic knows what he's talking about or not, did some guy smack it or did somebody take care, did they put the right oil in or not? These are variables that completely mess up the ability to predict an asset's performance, how long it's going to be in good performance before that failure curve starts, right? Never mind whether an asset's sitting in California or in Minnesota or in Florida. Very different environments, and they're going to have same asset, different life expectancies, different periods of operation before they start failing. So we look at that and go, and I hate to say this, and it's not meant as a slur or anything, but there is a notion of good enough is good enough.
Mm.
And so when we already are able to make the predictions based on, we know this asset will be in a state of failure with 95% confidence by X date. What does RCM say? RCM says, well, if you know your failure curve is 3 weeks, intervene in 1 week, take a third of that curve and do something next week. So what we aim to do is get the customer to engage at the right time based on the criticality analysis, based on their business model, based on whether they have redundancy or not, et cetera, et cetera. So when we say business 2 5.0, I would say we've probably are at the intersection of a step function change with the ability of AI to change our business. The question really is, will we keep it under control and really use it properly to make that step function change in productivity and better outcomes? Or are we going to, let it run roughshod like a feral animal, and actually that destroys the industry because then we're going to have
Yep.
lousy predictions and people are going to go, yeah, I don't want to touch it. Industry is not as open to it as municipalities are because industry knows it can make mistakes and their profitability goes down. Their ABB did a study that every hour that a piece of equipment is down costs the customer industry wide across North America $125,000 an hour.
Wow.
So You don't want to let AI come up with a prediction that's bad. Now, some of them are very good, but they've spent a lot of money making them good. The customer has, and it's taken a few years to do that.
Yeah, and again,
Municipalities don't have that time.
yeah, and this is the I guess calling it controversial might not be the right thing, but we have this kind of we have the industrial revolutions. We're
Yep.
not in the fifth industrial revolution. That is not a thing. And industry 4.0 as kind of a mindset versus the fourth industrial revolution. Well, when we look at those things, everybody from a technological and systems and way of being kind of viewpoint are kind of they're a 3 and a 4, and this idea behind 5 is already convoluted, being
Yeah.
leveraged, and people are talking about it. And some would say it's philosophical and it's about maybe environment and those things, and then other people would say, well, no, it's about people working side by side with cobots and that type of technology, and then we can then shift it again. And I'm kind of the idea that we're still in industry 4.0. It's still kind of what it was. It's just going through its own maybe evolutions, but it's not 5.0 yet. And then somebody made a joke when I did a post today about, oh yeah, well, didn't they tell you about industry 6.0? And I'm like, yeah, that's the one. And they're like, Greg, how did you know about that? And I said, yeah, because I just visited Fantasyland. And it's it's uh it's a lot of fodder. So here's
Well, who comes up with these numbers anyways? Who says it's 5.0 or 4.0? I mean, is there
right,
some?
who's the authority?
Yeah,
The-
exactly.
the-
Right.
we don't have those anymore, and we have to actually vet and revet the sources on everything. And at the end of the day, the majority of this stuff, you've said it even in this conversation, where we're going to get to some common sense. We're going to look at the basics. And one of the biggest issues across all of industry, technology, practitioner, everything in between, who knows which way, it's really too much that's not complicated gets overcomplicated by people that are trying to make things something that they're not, because they think they understand it and they don't know that they don't. And
Right.
then when you try to educate them, they bristle up. And some of that has to change. Don't know how it will, but we'll keep shouting about it. I want to switch into the fun question segment
Sure.
for you. First time on CMMS radio, so you have to kind of suffer through these 3 fun questions. And it's really so that people can kind of get a sense, other than us talking shop.
Sure.
So no wrong answers on any of these. So
Okay.
you just knock them down however you would if we were just chopping it up at a conference or having a cup of coffee. So
All right.
first fun question: what is your favorite music?
Oh, that's a tough one. Genre, decade, or overall, I would have to say anything that makes me dance in one
Okay.
level, right? Nostalgia kind of gets me. So I sort of, I guess, goes back into my youth. I love 60s stuff. Um, got educated in 70s rock and really started to enjoy that as well. So
That, that's
there's a few things I'm not crazy about. I won't mention them, but basically, I would say if it gets me to move, I'm down with it.
cool. I like it. I like it. Fun question number 2: what is your favorite sport or hobby? And on sport, it does not have to be one that you play. It could be one that you like to watch and support and root for.
All right, that one's pretty easy. I appreciate all the sort of the American sports this and that. I played baseball as a kid. I grew up partly in Canada, so we didn't have football per se. We had rugby. Um, but I will say my ultimate favorite, and I will get up in the middle of the night to watch World Cup soccer. I love playing soccer. I played soccer in high school. All my kids played soccer. I coached it. I did play hockey as well. So, like I said, there's a lot of stuff. There's something about soccer that I just really loved about it. I mean, I love to sail too. Gosh, if I had my druthers, I'd be on a sailboat for 6 months and healing like crazy.
Wow, that's that. I don't think I've heard anybody mention that one with regards to the sailing. I know some people that sail, and for me, they're like, "Have you ever done it?" And I'm like, "No," and I don't think I'm that guy, because it's quite involved if if you know what it really is, and it's pretty cool. So I like that you brought up one that I haven't heard before. Um, Here's the big one. The big one.
Sure.
Ooh. What is your philosophy, perspective, opinion, anything at all when it comes to the concept of work-life balance?
Ooh, that's shifted. Um, there was a great phrase from, I think the first best boss, the first best. I had a couple of best bosses, but this is the sort of the first really good boss. He said, "We work to support our family activities. Sometimes we have to work longer hours to get the job done, but then we have to sort of balance it out to make sure we're looking after the reasons why we're even doing this sort of stuff." So, and I think that captures it for me. That and there are times that I make a mistake, and the challenge with the role that I've got now is particularly because we don't have any offices to go to, and I have worked remote for 25 years, is when to shut it off. And
Mm,
because we have family members work in the company as well as, like, we're about 20 folks. Um, Sometimes turning that conversation off over dinner, we have to discipline ourselves to say no, no more work conversations, right?
yeah.
So it is you need discipline on it, and I think everybody wants to build something. I believe everybody loves to create stuff and build things, and whether it's with art or woodworking or something with your hands or whatever, there's a satisfaction you get from building something. Well, luckily, we all develop and grow over our lifetime, and something that maybe didn't interest me before in my 30s and 20s really interests me now. So building something is perhaps a little bit more abstract than I build a shed or something like. I still love doing that stuff, tinkering and inventing stuff. I love that. But um, the discipline of turning that off, and sometimes it's just like, I'm done. I can't do anymore. I got to shut my brain off, and I got to go for a walk, or I don't know, watch an episode of Big Bang Theory or something.
Well,
Sorry.
no, not at all. Not at all. This is the reason I say there's no wrong answers on this is, we're having a normal, natural conversation. We're learning things about how we see and understand the world. We don't have to be right. We're not trying to tell somebody, anything in absolutes. It gets people thinking
Yeah.
critically, not just about work-life balance, but about what we talked about in the technology. And I find it to be the healthiest way for you and I to have a dialogue that one person might pick something up from that gets them thinking. And even if they don't agree, it's all good stuff. So for everybody out there, first of all, Tacoma, thank you for being here with me on CMMS Radio.
So much fun. Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. And for people to get in touch with you, I want them to find you on LinkedIn. And it's Tacoma, Tacoma, and it's Zach, Zach. And you can also look for MentorAPM, and you put that all together, MentorAPM. You can find them at mentorapm.com. Make sure you check out that Asset Lens trial that they opened up. You can do that with 30 assets for 30 days. It's worth checking out. They want your feedback. They want to understand what the experience is. And I just want to hear about it myself too. So we're going to do this again in the future. And again, Tacoma, thank you for your time.
Greg, you are generous and an excellent host, and I had a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Did you find this episode helpful? Please send us some feedback, suggest a topic, or ask a question. Reach out to CMMS Radio if you need a co-pilot on your CMMS project. Visit CMMSradio.com and use the What's on Your Mind link. Thank you for tuning in to CMMS Radio, your resource for all things CMMS, from selection to implementation, to help you make better choices, learn from industry experts, and have a successful CMMS journey.